Hi everyone, welcome to today's lecture. It's week 5. Um, Before I start, let me I just have a couple of announcements. I will try to get your grades for your first paper by the end, hopefully no later than the end of next week, right? So I'll try to grade that throughout next week and then hopefully get that to you back by Sunday, hopefully. Not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. Um, right, so having done the first paper, I will be jumping right into the second paper, which is proposing a solution for this lecture. So start, brainstorming possible topics, right, for your second paper. But another option that I want to give you is to build on your first paper, right? I will give you the option, right, um, to use your first paper and then develop that into a proposing a solution paper, right? But that means, right, that I will be, or yeah, so that will be slightly easier because you've already thought about that topic, right? But you will still need to provide me with new sources, right? So you will need three new sources that you have not used before, right, in your first paper. So, so that's just like the um, it's not really an additional requirement, right? But that's one of my requirements if you're building right from your first paper is to provide me with at least three news sources. So one is a scholarly article, and then um, two can be reputable, right, non-scholarly articles. So if you're planning on building on off of your first paper, I suggest consulting with me or asking me for advice on how to do that, right? But anyway, we'll talk more about that next week because at the end of next week, you will be asked to give me a thesis, a possible thesis for your second paper, right? So we'll talk about that then. All right, so for today's class, we will talk about chapter 7 of the St. Martin's Guide, which is proposing a solution. Right, so in the first paper, I ask you um, to write about or to argue a position, right? So you had to pick an issue, a topic, right? And then you had to identify two opposing sides, right? Of the topic, and then you were asked to defend or choose a position and then defend and argue for that position, right? So for this paper, not only will you argue for the position, right, but you will also give a solution, right? That a kind of an additional layer to the argument, right, which is a solution. Um, in the first paper, you were basically asked to write an argument that would either change people's minds, right, or at least have them question, um, or at least get them to question their own ideas, right, if they did not already agree with you, right. Um, But for this paper, I think it's more urgent. It's more urgent in that we actually have to address not just change people's minds, right? But um, we ask them or we sort of convince them that your solution is a good solution, and then convince them then to take action, right? So action is the key thing here, right? So this paper should be more urgent. It should be more convincing, right? Because we're trying to get people to do something, right? All right. In the second part of the chapter, right, we see here how to determine the writer's purpose and audience, right? So I'll just read through this and then we can talk about it. All right, so when reading the proposals that follow, ask yourself what the writer's main purpose is and what he or she assumes about the readers. All right, so the writer's main purpose may be to convince readers that the problem exists, right? Inspire readers to take action by stressing the problem's urgency or seriousness, right? Persuade readers that the writer's proposed solution is feasible and can be implemented, right? So here, these are very important. Confirm the writer's refutation of objections and alternative solutions, right? So this is important, right? Because you have to identify an actual problem, right? A complex problem. And then you will have to sort of, stress the urgency or the seriousness, right, of the problem, right? Um, and and then persuade readers that the writer's proposed solution is feasible and can be implemented, right? So the solution, this is very important. The solution that you're going to propose, right, it has to be feasible. It has to be realistic, right? It's not, therefore it has to be specific, right? Like, try not to think of some big utopian solution, right, that everyone's going to be happy and uh, everything's going to be great, right? Try to be more specific, right, and try to make the solution sort of in a smaller scale. There is there is a good side, right, to having sort of big, imaginative solutions, right? But for the sake of this paper, I want you to really focus your solution, and I want it to be sort of smaller scale and more doable and more realistic, right? So that you can kind of break down how to sort of implement, right, that solution. And then confirm the writer's refutation or objections and alternative solutions, right? So you still have to address any counter arguments, right, or any objections, right, or alternative solutions. So the writer wants readers to react by recognizing that the problem exists, right, and is serious, decide to take action to solve the problem, committing to implementing the writer's proposed solution, preferring the writer's solution over alternative solutions, right? And so your goal then is to really convince your readers, to make it clear to them that there is a serious problem here, right? But there is a solution to the problem, and here it is. I will break it down for you, right, in a clear and in a detailed way, and in a way that is supported by evidence, right? And then I will acknowledge, right, uh, objections, right? And so you, like, all of those things, right, should be you should be thinking uh, you should be thinking of sort of convincing your think about this as like politicians do, right? This is what politicians do, is propose, especially when politicians are campaigning, right? And you hear them make a speech or whatever, um, and one part of that speech is usually them trying to, like, break down, right, break down the problem, break down the solution, right? But then another layer to that is how convincing they are, right? So what do they do? I suggest go to Google and find any politician that you admire, right? And sort of observe how they make their speeches, right, or how they talk about problems and how they talk about solutions. But or right, so pay attention to what problems, right, they talk about, and sort of what solutions they're offering, right. But also pay attention to how they speak, right. And they use anecdotes. They use, and some of this are bullshit, right. It's not like, I'm not saying that everything that politicians say are true, right. Of course, they want to win. They want to, some of them want to gain power, some of them want to gain money, and blah blah blah, right. There's all that. But for the sake of, their argument, right, pay attention to sort of what kinds of anecdotes they use, right, what kind of, how they appeal to their listeners, right, by, you know by sort of making the problem sound, sometimes they make it sound more urgent than it really is, right. And I don't want you to do that, right. But you know what they're doing is to make, is to kind of, to convince you, right, that the problem um, is really important, really serious, right? And that's why sometimes they kind of exaggerate. And I don't want you to exaggerate, but I want you to, like, emphasize the seriousness of the problem, right? Which is what they do, right? And some of them exaggerate and make it, make it sound more dystopian and apocalyptic than things really are, right? So that's, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to exaggerate too much, right? But I want you to kind of press on the urgency, right, of the problem. Anyway, um, yeah. So pay attention to how convincing, right, you're sounding in your paper, right, on top of, providing all of the necessary parts. All right, so again, right, with the basic features, the basic features are pretty much the same, right? You have to have a focused and well-defined problem, right? A well-argued solution, an effective response to objections and alternative solutions, a clear and logical organization, right? So they're pretty much the same, but I want to talk about them in terms of this specific paper, right? So let's start with a focused and well-defined problem. Um, all right, so I will just read this passage from the book. Um, Read first to see how the writer defines or frames the problem. Framing, it's saying to, like, read the O'Malley sample essay. Framing a problem is a way of preparing readers for the proposed solution by focusing on the aspect of the problem the proposal tries to solve. Right. In More Testing, More Learning, for example, student Patrick O'Malley frames the problem in terms of the detrimental effects of high-stakes exams on students' learning. If O'Malley were writing to students instead of their teachers, he might have framed the problem in terms of students' poor study habits or procrastination. By framing the problem as he does, he indicates that teachers, rather than students, have the ability to solve the problem and tries to convince readers that it is real and serious. Right. So here, um, O'Malley has sort of identified a problem, right? And the problem for him is this high stakes exams, right? Some, classes would have one or maybe two really long exams every quarter, right? Maybe one long exam for midterm, and then one long exam in the finals, right? And for O'Malley, that's not a very productive way of learning because it's very stressful for students, right? Um, but they also he thinks that it also um, does not let students to have sort of like long-term learning gain, right? That is, students tend to procrastinate and prepare kind of like last minute and like memorize, right? And then, maybe do okay or do well in class, and then they'll forget about, um, what they've learned, right? Um, and so for O'Malley, right, this like having one or two exams that are very long, right, is a problem. Um, and so his solution is to have more exams throughout the quarter, but in kind of like smaller, shorter exams, right? So that's his solution. So once he's identified that problem, right, he also had to identify who he's addressing to in this paper, right? Like who should um, like because one side of this, right, could be, do the students just need to study more, or should the students just need to, like not procrastinate, right? So one part of this is to address the students, right, to propose solution on what the students can do to this problem, right? Um, the other side of this, right, is to propose a solution to the professors, right, which is what he's doing. So he's chosen to solve the problem by appealing not to the students but to the professors, right? By saying that actually professors can solve this problem if they did X, Y, and Z, right? Which is to have more exams but shorter, um, and yeah, shorter exams, right? So that's another thing, right? Is to identify, um, which group of people, right, could um, could help, right, solve this problem, right? And in the case of O'Malley, it's the teachers, right, the professors that are able to do this. Right. All right. So going back to the problem, right? Um, Make sure that in your introduction you're really clear on the problem, right? You have to set up, because if the problem is not clear, then your solution, even if your solution is good, it's it's not going to be helpful because um, you'll lose the reader, and like you'll lose them because it's not clear to them, what the problem is, right? So you have to be clear on what's clear and specific, right, on what the problem is, and then that will strengthen your solution, right? All right. So and you have to make that clear. You have to make the problem clear, really in the first paragraph, in the introduction, right, before you give me your thesis, right? So, because in the thesis, you will then include the solution, right, your proposed solution in thesis, right? And so it has to be clear to me, like what your problem is before I see, right, your solution in the thesis. Okay, so one example here, right, is a cause and effect introduction, right, which sets up um, it sets up the problem, right. Um, so let me read this. Sugar sweetened beverages, sugar sweetened beverages, as soda sweetened with sugar, corn syrup, or other caloric sweeteners, and other carbonated and uncarbonated drinks, such as sports and energy drinks, may be the single largest driver of the obesity epidemic. A recent meta analysis found that the intake of sugared beverages is associated with increased body weight, poor nutrition, and displacement of more healthful beverages. Increasing consumption increases risk for obesity and diabetes. Right. Um, right. So the way this author, right, or I guess there are two authors here, Brownell and Frieden, the way they're setting up the problem, right, is by setting it up through a cause and effect structure, right? So what is the cause? Sugar sweetened beverages, right? And then he kind of specified, right, exactly which sugar sweetened beverages. So soda, which is soda carbonated and or both carbonated and uncarbonated drinks, right? Sports drinks, energy drinks, and all of this, yeah, that has high sugar. Because there are also some of these drinks that are not that does not have, you know, or that do not have high sugar. Like I don't know, like it's become popular now, La Croix, right, or flavored sparkling water, right, which is not sweet, but they're just sort of flavored, right. And I don't know if there is, you know, a whole nother problem for those kinds of drinks, right. But this paper is not talking about those. This paper is talking about drinks that are high in sugar, right. So it's very specific what the cause is, right. Um, and then the effect, right. This is the problem, and or this is what causes the problem, and this is the effect, right. Um, so the effect is increased body weight, poor nutrition, and displacement of more healthful beverages. Increasing consumption increases risk for obesity and diabetes, right? So in this problem is what caused it, and then what the effect, right? So we're clear on what the problem is. The problem is, um, you know, malnutrition, right, caused specifically by high sugared drinks, right? So it's it's a simply it's a simple problem, right? But it's very clear and very specific, right? So that's an example of a good of a good way, right, to set up a problem in your introduction, right? Okay, and then next is a well-argued solution, right? So a well-argued solution, this is when you're going to set up your solution, right? Um, and this starts with the thesis, right? In the thesis, you will have to include what your solution is, right? And how you're going to address that. Okay, so let's read this sample thesis, right? So this is a long-ish thesis. It's 3 sentences, right? Which is fine. Yeah, which is fine. Like I usually say, um, you know, the thesis should be the last sentence, right, of your introduction. But you know, 2, 3, I think 3 sentences might be the max, right? Because any more than that, it just kind of like the thesis just kind of disappears into the introduction, right? So I would say, you know, 3 sentences max, because you know theses are supposed to be um, you know, complex and long, right? And so sometimes, you know, you can put it in one long sentence, or you can just break it up into 2 or 3 shorter sentences, right? So that's fine. And this is an example of, you know, that 3 sentence structure. Um, so not only do high stakes exams discourage frequent study and undermine students' performance, they also do long-term damage to students' cognitive development. If professors gave brief exams at frequent intervals, students would be spurred to learn more and worry less. They would study more regularly, perform better on tests, and enhance their cognitive functioning. Right. All right. So let's see what O'Malley is doing here. Right. So in this thesis, what's included is the problem, right, and the disadvantages of the problem, right. You see a solution here, and then you see the benefits, right, of the solution. So those three. So the thesis should be a summary of the problem, the solution, and the benefits, right, of the solution. Um, okay, so let's break it down. So not only do, and I'm giving you my notes again, right? And so if you're following, uh, so not only do the underlined, right, that's the problems and the disadvantages. So not only do high stakes exams discourage frequent study and undermine students' performance, they also do long-term damage to students' cognitive development, right? So he's reiterating, right, the problem here. If professors, so this is, I highlighted this, right? If professors gave brief exams at frequent intervals, right? So that's his solution. Giving brief exams at frequent intervals. So shorter but more exams throughout the quarter, right? Students would be spurred to learn more and worry less, right? So they would study more regularly, perform better on tests, and enhance their cognitive functioning, right? So he even kind of he gave us a little more than what we needed in this thesis, right? If he ended this thesis um, in that sentence, to learn more and worry less, that would have been fine, right? And then he could have just um, you know broken down these three different parts, right? So they would study regularly, um, perform better in tests, right? Because I'm guessing he's going to mention all those three throughout, right? And enhance their cognitive functioning, right? So, um, so I don't think that this sentence, they would study more regularly, blah blah. The last sentence, right, is necessary for this thesis. Although it's fine, like it's not wrong. I think in this case, it might be even better, right? Because he kind of summarized the benefits of his argument, right? But I don't think it's necessary to include this here, right? Because he already mentioned here that he will also um, that the benefits, right, of his solution will be that the students will learn more and worry less, right? So it's more productive and then less stressful. So that's kind of clear already. Um, but anyway, yeah, like pay attention to this sort of to this structure, right? That's what I will be looking for in your thesis. All right, so next is an effective response to objections and alternative solutions, right? Okay, here. Sorry, I'm a little lost. Okay. Right here. An effective response to objections and alternative solutions. Um, Again, right, you have to identify alternative solutions, right? How might other people sort of question your solution, right? Or at least acknowledge, different ways of solving the problem, because you have the problem, right? And you're only sort of addressing it in, it's one part, right? You're not I don't want you to sort of solve the entire problem, right? Because again, this is a short paper, and you can't say everything, and so you're only sort of addressing one part of the problem, right? And so there might be other solutions out there, right? Or there might even be other solutions to that same uh, or alternative solution to your solution, right? For that part of the problem, right? So you have to sort of acknowledge or be aware, right, of what other solutions there are, and you have to kind of acknowledge that, right? And so having sort of acknowledged, right, other solutions or objections, what might other people say? Oh, this is too expensive, right? Or your solution is too unrealistic, or um, it's too specific to one group of people, and it's not addressing problems in other groups of people, right? So that those could be, possible objections, right? And so you'll have to decide whether you concede, right? Which means you just say, some people say this, that, my solution only addresses this group of people, but does not address this group of people, right? And they are right to think that, right? But my solution is actually only, a small part of the solution, right? And it's only addressing certain kinds of people, and other people could use the same solution to address um, um, other groups of people, right? And so that's, that's kind of conceding, saying that yes, that objection is valid, right? But I am doing something specific here that doesn't really apply. So this is my reason, right, for doing this. Um, or you could refute it, which means you can object their objections. You can say, yes, I acknowledge that some people say this about my solution, but actually they're wrong because A, B, and C, right? um, and that's a more challenging way to address an objection, because then if you're going to say, right, that they are wrong, then you have to kind of prove why they are wrong, right? So it's up to you. It depends on what sort of objections there are, right? Um, and yeah, and I want you to use, there are examples here, templates, right, on how to kind of start that conversation of concession or refutation, right? So when you the conceding part here, right? X and Y are right when they say that blank, 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 and blank, right, are likely to be problems, right? So this is, you can follow that. You can just, copy that structure, right? That they're right to say that, this is the limitations of my solution, right? Um, and this does not solve all of the problems, right? And then the refutation here, some object that my proposal would cost too much, cause too much disruption, but in action would cost even more, um, or would cost even more disruption by increasing blank or inhibiting blank, right? So this is another structure that you can kind of um, follow, right? All right, and lastly, we have a clear and logical organization, right? So this one is, pretty much the same for your first paper, right? Make sure, the breakdown of your paragraphs, right? Or your different paragraphs should be sort of organized a certain way, right? Introduction, body paragraphs, right? Conclusion, but also, right, within each paragraph, right, there has to be a kind of a smooth kind of structure, right? And that's just, using um, using conjunctions, right, or using kind of like organizational tactics, right? By saying, for example, my solutions consist of three parts, right? And the first part is blah blah. The second part is blah blah. The third part is blah blah, right? Um, or you can say something like, On the one hand, my solution does this. On the other hand, it also does this, right? And then summarize it, right? So these are, kind of things that will help you structure um, your paper, right? Examples here of transitions, right? So the main reason professors, etc., right? Another um, closely related argument, etc. Moreover, right, still, furthermore, therefore, right, these are sort of transitions and conjunctions that, we already use anyway. I'm sure you're already using them, but it's good to be aware, right, of when you're using them. And, some people kind of use these transitions and conjunctions way too much, and sometimes they may misuse them, right? And so when you're aware of like what these transitions are for, what they mean, um, then it's you're more likely to use them in the right context, right? So just kind of be aware of how you're sort of structuring your sentences, right, and how you're structuring um, the paragraphs. All right, so those are kind of like the basic structure um, of this essay, and um, it's pretty much the same, right? But there's a different aspect to this, which is the urgency, and which is the solution part, right? Of your paper has to be clear, right? In this in this paper. So let's just very quickly look at the example here, right? Which is um, the paper by Patrick O'Malley, right, which is more testing, more learning, right. So I've talked about this paper earlier, right. So it's about it's a criticism of the problem, right, that long exams, fewer but long exams, right, are actually very stressful and not productive to students, right. And he is proposing that the solution is to um, to ask professors, right, and teachers to have shorter exams, um, but more frequently, right. For him, that is not only more productive, right, but it's also good for the mental health of students, right. Which then sort of maybe translates to productivity. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's what he's trying to say. All right. So let's read here the first two paragraphs, right? It's late at night. The final's tomorrow. You get a C on the midterm. So this one will make or break you. Will it be like the midterm? Did you study enough? Did you study the right things? It's too late to drop the course. So what happens if you fail? No time to worry about that now. You've got a ton of notes to go over, right? Um, so that kind of like opening uh, paragraph, which is short, right? Which I appreciate that it's short anecdote because um, it's short, but it's very pointed, right? It's very direct, um, and it's very relatable, right? Especially to students. I think it's actually very effective, right? Because it catches the reader's attention that, oh, I've been through this before, right? So yeah. So although this last-minute anxiety about midterm and final exams is only too familiar to most college students, many professors may not realize how much major, infrequent, high-stakes exams work against the best interest of students, both psychologically and cognitively. Yeah, in the first paragraph, he's not sure to whom the problem needs to, we're not sure, right, to whom the problem is being addressed. But in the second paragraph, we see immediately, right, that he is addressing the professors, right? So many professors may not realize how such major infrequent, right? So we know that, oh, okay, see, he's addressing the professors here. They cause unnecessary amounts of stress, placing too much importance on 1 or 2 days in the student's entire term, judging ability on a single or dual performance. reporting on recent research at Cornell University Medical School. Sian Baylock, a psychology professor at the University of Chicago, points out that stressing about doing blah blah blah. Right. So um, he's setting up right the problem also by using other people's research, which is effective because that adds to the urgency, right? So actually, professionals have talked about this, and this is an issue that is already is this is an issue that is already in the minds of many people, right? Moreover, Cornell's research using fMRI brain scans showed that the pressures of being of big test can reach beyond the exam itself, stunting the cognitive system that support the attention and memory skills, right? So not only do high-stakes exams discourage frequent study and undermine students' performance, right? So that's the rest of that is his thesis, right? So this is a good example, right, of an effective introduction. He's doing a lot of things in this introduction, but it's not too long, which I appreciate, right? So there's an anecdote, there's kind of statistics and research, right? And then examples of what the problems are, right? Examples of how the problem works, right? And then the thesis, right? So all of those things are going on in these two paragraphs, introductions, right? Yeah, so I think in the next, I will just stop here. In the next video for next week, right, I will talk more about this example, right? Because I don't want to overwhelm you too much. You just finished your first paper, and then you'll have to start thinking about this right now. Um, so for the next, because the next paper or the readings, right, for next week, they're not from this book. What are they for? So next week's readings are, yeah, so the next week's readings are PDFs from, from iLearn. So go to course materials and then download They Say, I Say, and paragraphs, right? So these PDFs, they're not really sort of, I was going to say they're not important, but they are. But they're more sort of stylistic, right? You should read them, and I will talk about them in the lecture, right? But I won't talk about them a lot because they are sort of more suggestions on how you can improve your style of writing, right? But I think they're very useful, especially in terms of organizing your paragraphs, your sentences, and stuff like that. Um, so do read them, but since I won't be talking too much about them, I will spend the other half of the lecture talking about this example and then another example from this chapter, right? On how to structure or how these examples, right, structure their solution and their counter arguments and stuff like that, right? So I will be talking more about these sample essays in my first paper. So for now, just kind of start thinking about possible topics or how you might develop your first paper into proposing a solution um, essay. I think that's it for now. So I hope to see you tomorrow, right? Friday for the Zoom meeting, right? So there are, let me see, how many weeks do we have left? So we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, five more Zoom meetings, right? So pay attention to that. Like you are required to participate in 3 Zoom meetings in order to get the 10-point participation grade, right? And we have 5 left, right? So try to make sure you have those three meetings down, right? But of course, you're welcome to join us in the Zoom meeting every week, right? If you want, and I think it will only help you if you are actually in the Zoom meetings as frequently as you can. Right. Right. Bye.